Hello everyone and welcome to episode 381 of 5 Star Potential, your weekly fix of everything Football Manager. I'm your host Dave, and joining me today, we've got one Mad. We've got our normal Paul Madden. Mad, how you keeping?
How's it going? Only one Mad on this side, yeah?
Yeah, and we have got a second Mad today. We've got a very special guest today. We've got DeLucas, also known in the FM community as the Mad Scientist. DeLucas, how you been keeping, man?
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I'm all well. How are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you. No, it's great to have you on. I think this is your 5 Star Pod debut and hopefully the first of a number of appearances over the next number of years, I'm sure. Before we get into it, we've got lots to talk about today. Obviously, the save updates. We'll talk a little bit more on why DeLucas is with us today as well. But Mad, anything been going on over the last week or so? Any winners, losers, FM updates?
I'm just going to wind him up and say, are you talking to me, Dave? Mad? Sorry. Okay.
There you go. I'll call you Mad and the Mad Scientist by his normal name as well.
I mean, Dave, there was a time that I was on your Talking Wolves podcast. You were calling me Paul, and it was weird. I thought,
sorry.
Like, you were like my dad or something. So, what to talk about this? It's a bad week, Dave. Newcastle lost to West Ham at home.
I watched the game, actually.
It was just shit, and it's ruined. I've done 2 podcasts about it, and I'm absolutely drained. There's nothing worse than having to, and Dave, you'll be well used to this as a Wolves fan. There is nothing worse than having to do a full-on review podcast after a shit performance and after a bad result. But in a way, I suppose it's therapeutic, but it's definitely a bad start to the week. Monday Night Football, don't like it, don't need it, don't want it.
No. I mean, when the podcast is out, we'll have had another weekend of fixtures. So hopefully you'll be smiling a little bit more on the next week's pod. And this podcast will be out at the start of December as well. I can't believe this year has gone so quick. FM 25 was meant to be out, I think, yesterday. We recorded on Wednesday, the 27th. It was meant to officially be out yesterday, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners are gutted to not see it out as well. But yeah, for the next few weeks, now we're in December, we'll have our Christmas special episodes as well, looking at a special type of challenge, something that we've never really done before. DeLucas, who's your team? Do you ever get upset? Do you ever have weekends where you're distraught about your football team? I mean, I can see you wearing a Parma cap there, but have you got a team local to you as well, or?
Actually, it's a weird story because I'm Danish, but I've been supporting Parma since the early 90s.
Right, okay.
So every weekend is kind of tough for us since the 90s, actually, where we had our golden era. It's been
times.
Up and down since then, mostly down, but gotta stay loyal, right?
Yeah. No, I love that. No, it's a different team instead of...
Yeah, they are back in Serie A, though, aren't they, this year?
They are, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Gone are the days of Hristo Stoichkov and Gianfranco Zola. Yeah,
Buffon.
No, I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more later on the show as well. Matt, have you got a little FM update of your journey in Spain? I know we had quite a bumper update with you and Duke last week. Have you got any updates since then?
Yeah, I've been playing a little bit, actually. Last week with Duke, I went through all of season 3. And so I'm managing Deportivo La Coruña. Again, another throwback to the olden days, or the great days that have since passed by for that club. First season, we got promoted, which was through the playoffs. And then the second season, we finished 11th. I talked a lot about transfers that we made, some really good players that came in. We're doing quite a lot of like buy low, sell high. And I suppose I'm not going to go into it all again, but we finished 3rd in season 3, completely unexpectedly. Cameron Archer, Dave, you remember I signed him, brought him in for 6.25 million. He scored 24 goals in that season. And he was joint top scorer with Kylian Mbappe up to the last day of the season. And games were on at the same time. Archer was like on his last legs. He'd played like so many games, but I was like, I'm not taking him off. He needs to get the golden boot. And on the 80th minute, Kylian Mbappe scored for Real Madrid, and he stole the crown from Cameron Archer. But a really good signing. I still have him now in the 4th season. When I left off on the last save update quickly, I had talked about a midfielder I had loaned in from Sassuolo. His name is Luca Lipani, Lipani. He's a real player. He's not a new gen. He's only 22 as I speak, looking at it now. He's a midfielder. I've been playing him as a Carrilero, 6'2", and he's just got really good all-around attributes. And he had like a 7.3, 7.4 average rating for the whole season. So I had a 16 million optional fee on him. And I didn't really have the money. But I knew if I let him go to the end of that loan contract, I'd never get him again because his value was just going to go up or they wouldn't send him back. So I ended up selling a right back to start with. So I had a right back called William, it's really hard to pronounce, it's Mikel Bronsis. I had signed him from the German league, and he's French, if memory serves me correctly. We got a 15 million bid in for him, but he had got 14 assists in the league in that season, so it was a hard sell. But basically, I was like, look, I can't let the opportunity go to bring in this midfielder for 15 million. So I got him in permanently, 1 out, 1 in. His value is doubled already. So I'm kind of glad we've brought him in, because at the worst case scenario, we'll sell him on for a profit, which is the whole buy low, sell high model. Unfortunately, even though I finished third, lads, my board gave me 8 million. Aside from that transfer I made, they just gave me 8 million to spend to go and take on the Champions League with Deportivo La Coruña. And like, we're so far behind Madrid and Barcelona, it's not even funny. Even though we finished third, Madrid finished second, 27 points ahead of us.
Oh my
and
God.
Barcelona won the league 30 points ahead of us. So that just shows you, that's La Liga all over, right? Atletico Madrid had struggled, and then they just they went on a big run at the end of the season. They nearly caught up with us, but we managed to kind of pip them to third, and see if Simeone's still there. So we're miles behind. So yeah, I was a bit panicked, I'm not going to lie, going into all these extra games with a really young squad. Again, the average kind of price I'm paying for players is like 3, 4, 5 million. You know, last season I brought 10 players in and spent 25 million on them. But as I said, that's the whole point, right? Trying to find bargains and ultimately sell them on, because I'm going to need to build up all that cash to compete. So Dave, you'll remember, and to Lucas, a player you might have heard of. His name is Junior Krupi. We had signed him from Lorient in Ligue 1. He's a wonder kid in game. Started to get a lot of interest in him. Chelsea were floating around, Newcastle were floating around, Inter Milan were floating around. And I kind of got a few bids in of like 30, 35 million with different bunches of add-ons. And I was like, I think he's worth more. So I was playing the waiting game, and I was like, if I have to go into August, yeah, I still think I can get more. And we ended up managing to negotiate with Bayern 55 million plus a little 50% of the profit. And this is a player we'd brought in for 11 million originally, and I'd only paid half of that up front. So massive profit for him. I had to sell him, and he had a great season. We were playing him as a centre mid in attack. So with 2 to 3 weeks left in the window, maybe 2 weeks, I suddenly had 55 million, 100% of the revenue up front to go and absolutely just blow, and in a bit of a rushed manner. But like, the thing is, obviously we needed to buy quite a lot of players and to add to the squad. Now, I say that, but I then came across a midfielder to replace Junior Krupi, and this is a player I'd only seen once in FM before in my last save, and I think he'd ended up in Newcastle. Dave, you might know him. He came from Benfica. His name is João Rego, Rego. I don't know if you've heard of him before.
No, not sure.
I signed him. He's 22 now, and I'm in 2026, let's say. Coming from Benfica, like he probably will start off in their youth team, I'd imagine. So just very similar profile to Junior Krupi. A similar profile in the sense of he's more of an attacking midfielder, or even a forward on the left. But I wanted to play him in that centre mid and attack role and just kind of change him. 26 million, and I went, fuck it, let's bring him in. Wow. So I'm still doing buy low, sell high, because I'm hoping to sell him for 100.
Treat yourself.
Treat myself, yeah. It is Christmas, of course. But again, I just really wanted to bring in that quality player. Yeah, again, we've got Champions League games to go and play, and I'll tell you quickly about those in a minute. So I brought him in, but that still left us with a good 30, 35 million to spend. So I started to kind of just bring in a lot of different players. Again, you won't know loads of the names, but Dave, you'll know one I brought in for 5.5 million. Carlos Borges, once of Wolves, I believe.
Yeah. Like they're calling him Carlos Borges now. Yeah.
So brought him in to play on the right, very quick, and that's what I wanted, is really quick wingers. I brought in a defensive midfielder from PSV called Ryan Flamingo, because it's a great name, good. Ryan Flamingo, just because. Then I wanted to bolster up the squad numbers, so I brought in a striker from Empoli called Gaetano Oristanio. He had a lot of different clubs interested in, so I just went in and stole him, as you do. I spoke to Dupe last week about a winger that was at Athletic Bilbao called Adrian Perez. Again, he's really quick. Brought him in for 5 million. Oristanio was 5 million. A midfielder called Dennis Kagan from Rapid Vienna, 7 million. Again, it's all just players that have really good attributes, really, really young, and hopefully will sell on again. I needed a new right back. I brought in a fella called Harry Clark, who plays for Ipswich, I think, now in real life. Very young. I think he just made his debut in the Premier League. And because, Dave, I have to sign Irish players. We brought in Jason Knight on a free. Wow. Because why not? So, yeah, a whole ton of players brought in to bolster up the squad. Obviously, Cameron Archer's still there. Lipani's still there. We've pretty decent defence. That guy, Coney De Winter, that we'd bought has done really well. You remember we signed him from Lazio, I think. So, yeah, spent 37.5 million in the summer, it says here, because maybe one of those, I think one of those bids is in the previous window, counts as a early transfer in the other screen, but obviously sold quite a lot too. So where I am now, we're in season 4 after finishing third. I don't know if I'm ever going to finish third again because just the players we're bringing in, it's almost like going down to build them up and then going down to build them up. Right now I'm in February 2027, but I'm actually 5th in the league as it stands. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, it could actually be higher. So season started pretty well. The first month in August, we won 2 and drew 2. Now, no big teams in there. Beat Tenerife and Osasuna, and then draws against Alaves and Sociedad, fine. Lost 5-1 to Real Madrid, but we don't talk about playing Real Madrid or Barcelona anymore. And then, we actually won, I'm looking at kind of September, October. We won 6 games out of 8 or 9. And then in November, we went unbeaten, but we had quite a few draws. And then as I look at December, we won kind of 3 games. So we were kind of sitting in 4th around December. And I'm going to talk about Champions League in a minute, but everything absolutely tanked literally as we went into the new year. Lost to Sevilla, lost to Barcelona in the Supercopa competition. I still don't really know what it is because I don't know why we were there. It's something about top of the league and finalists. And because it's always the same 2, they need to bring in 2 others. Lost to Tenerife. We lost to Sporting Gijon. We just lost a ton of games in a row through January and February, but we're still holding on to 5th because we had a couple of good runs there before Christmas. However, in the Champions League is an interesting one. We beat Club Brugge. I'm just looking at it here. We lost 2-1 to Liverpool really narrowly. We had a draw with Dynamo Zagreb. We just about beat Copenhagen. And then we went and we beat Arsenal in the Emirates, and I've absolutely no idea how we did it. Cameron Archer on the score sheet there, which is great. And then, we lost to Inter and we lost to Napoli. So we managed to get into the playoffs of the new Champions League format that we all, of course, love now. It's just wonderful. Makes so much sense. You know what?
I think this year, because very quickly as we speak, PSG are in the elimination zone as such. So I think over the next couple of weeks, it could actually be quite fun. Some of the games in the Champions League, I'm used to it. I think
there'll be entertainment, but looking at the games, you said we were recording on Wednesday. The games on Tuesday, there was 4 games where it was 5-0, 5-1, 6-1.
Oh, yeah. No,
6-2,
I understand. Yeah,
so, and
it's
you
good for
just
the
find yourself wondering,
but some of the clubs involved, it's probably a little bit frustrating, but
it is, yeah. And then just literally we're in February now. So I mentioned the last game of the league stage. You play those 7 games. Mm-hmm. We lost to Napoli at home 2-0. But we did manage to, the wins we picked up against Arsenal and Copenhagen and those managed to get us a playoff spot. Who do we draw in the playoffs? Napoli, again. Wow. So, that's not great content because you literally play Napoli, lose to them, and then you have to go and play them twice again. And man, they absolutely battered us I've played the first leg. They beat us 3-0 and I was at home. They still have Lukaku and I'm pretty sure they still have Osimhen in game. So that's hard to deal with in Football Manager. So yeah, look, things are going going okay. 5th in the league is actually pretty good, but the slump I'm in now, even as I look at my fixtures, we lost 7-2 to Real Madrid. We lost 3-0 to Real Sociedad. Literally, whatever has happened going from 2026 to 2027, I've literally won 2-3 games in about 10. So it's looking like there's a bit of a slump and a drop down the league, but it's probably more real to where we are as a club and the squad and everything. But at the same time, I could just really enjoying the save. It's the most I've played FM since FM24 came out. I had a big hiatus there kind of in the summer. So it's nice to just be back playing. But I don't know, maybe I'll be mid-table by the time we come back next week.
It's weird because I honestly thought when the news about FM25 came out, I thought I would really struggle to stay interested in Football Manager, but I'm in a similar sort of boat to you, Matt, to be fair. I've really the last week or so, really been on it with FM. Very quickly before I go into my update as well, the one thing, and I imagine some people who are listening to this may think it's a little bit not cheating, maybe that's a stronger word, but I think for your save, Mad, and it's such an easy thing, I'm sure we've spoken about it on the podcast before, is if you go onto international teams, I don't think it works on senior teams, but under 21s and under 18s, if you add a column of media description, it will come up with promising winger, fullback, or wonder kid. And if you go into quite niche nations as such, you could probably find some decent deals for wonder kids, and I think that could be a way. But like I said, some people listening to this probably think it's cheating. Maybe, I don't know, but
I think it is and it isn't. I think the one thing you'd say is the media description. You can have players who are wonder kids that just don't have wonder kid as a media description, for example.
No, yeah, for sure.
So, it's kind of give and take with it. What I do a lot of is, even though I have pretty decent scouts, they still recommend players who I just think we've moved beyond in terms of level. Like, they'll tell me someone is an A, and I'll be like, I have the fucking notion of signing him. So I actually just kind of I'll randomly take a spin up to Denmark or over to Croatia myself and just start going through teams and looking at their youth teams and looking at even their first team, and if there's a 17, 18-year-old in there. And you take great pleasure when you see a young player who's, got the little wanted icon beside their name, and then you see, oh, it's Dortmund or it's Newcastle or Inter Milan, and I'll be like, yeah, I'll have them. And just take them before they even get a chance, because they would do the same to you.
Yeah, exactly. Very quickly as well, I've been listening to a real life football podcast, Under the Cosh. I listen to them quite regularly. And there was one this week with a guy called Terry Gibson, played more, I think, 70s, 80s sort of times, but then he went on to coach, and he was a coach or assistant at Northern Ireland. And they found Johnny Evans through Football Manager, because the son was playing Football Manager, and said, oh, do you know there's a kid that plays for Manchester United under 18s that's Northern Irish? So they got him to train with the first team. He'd never played for United at this point. And he was unbelievable when they played him against Spain, and they beat Spain. I think it was on his debut. I'm glad I listened to it. I think it was yesterday. I thought, wow, that's like a really good story. I was thinking about clipping it up and putting it on the socials, but I'm sure Johnny Evans would have gone on to have the career he had regardless. But that was before he barely kicked a ball for Manchester United, and he got called up through Football Manager. So, I mean, there's who was it, Ben Brereton Diaz? They found out he had Chilean descent through Football Manager as well.
That's a guy actually that I know on Twitter. I follow him on Twitter. I think he follows me. His name is Cocky the Chilean Toon or something. He's like a Chilean Newcastle fan or something. And
he? And he found out he was.
He found it in Football Manager, and he created this social media campaign, like this kind of like march to get Brereton Diaz called up, and that's how his name changed and everything. Yeah, so I think that guy can take credit for that. It's cool. Yeah. I need to get onto the Irish national team management and tell them download Football Manager, because we need to find some young Irish players quick. The future is bleak.
No, exactly. Lucas, before we move on to you, I'll very quickly update everybody on the Pentagon challenge. And I know obviously I was missing last week, so I couldn't really update you. It's probably a good job, because I think Doob may have made me write this tweet that he's been waiting for me to post out. I'm trying to find the result because I haven't got the save open, but we crashed out the Copa Libertadores in some fashion in my latest season. I got to the quarterfinal. We were 3-2 up in the first leg. I thought, happy days, like we're looking good. And in the second leg, I think we lost like 6-0. Still, it's happened to me, and I'm maybe 25 plus seasons into this save now, and it's happened to me a handful of times where we just go, we crash and burn in the second leg, and we don't lose by a goal or two, we just fall apart, and I don't know what it is. Frustratingly, we absolutely smashed the league, probably one of my most comfortable league victories throughout the whole save, but somehow we failed in the Copa Libertadores. But I was going to say summer, but the end of the year in Brazil, I've had quite a big squad revamp, a number of top players wanted by big clubs. My left winger, very good player, rejected a move to Bayern Munich. I thought, okay, here we go. And then Manchester City came in, matched the bid pretty much, and he went to Man City, which I didn't mind because it gave me a lot of funds to, spend on other areas. And we've got the balance that I've got and the quality now that I've got in this team. And I've just started the Copa Libertadores group stage again. We're halfway through. We've beaten everyone pretty much 5-6-0. In terms of the quality of the team, it's just far too good at the moment. And interestingly enough, I'll finish on that. Raposo, his name was, the left winger that moved to City. I found it so hard to find a replacement for him. Really, really hard to find someone as good. But there was somebody, and it's quite apt because of the name of our podcast. He had 5-star potential, left winger. He was only 17, and he was called just Ronaldo. And I thought, yeah, perfect. So we've got him in, and he's not an automatic starter, but he's had some game time. But in terms of the balance of the squad, it's very, very good. And I'm hoping there's going to be a promising update next week when we're into December. The first Christmas gift, podcast gift of the year is me finally, hopefully, completing the Pentagon challenge. But we'll wait and see. But DeLucas, sorry, Matt,
Dupe will be eagerly waiting that, but that's Dupe in the background there, not having a go. Dave, if you haven't listened back to last week's pod, which was
I listened to the intro, Matt. That's all I've done so far. So
he beefed you at one point, and he beefed you.
It was about my ex-girlfriend, wasn't it? I did hear that. Yeah. I had Jace message me about that as well. Anyway,
okay, yeah. I was hoping you hadn't heard it.
No, I did. That's where I got the thumbnail picture of you two from. Was when you were laughing at my expense. Yeah, like I said, Lucas, let's switch the focus over to you now. So for people who are listening to this, who they aren't completely aware of who the mad scientist is, how would you describe yourself and sort of your role within the Football Manager community?
So, yeah, I'm a database editor, and my specialty for the last many years has been retro databases. Mm-hmm. I bring specific seasons from a past version of Championship Manager, Football Manager, up to the modern version of Football Manager, and make those databases. So I'm actually spending more time in the pre-game editor than playing the actual game.
Yeah, that was going to be sort of our next question. I know we had a very quick word with you before we started the podcast about it, but do you actually get much time to have a proper Football Manager save in between all the editing? Like, when's the last proper FM? What's the last proper FM save you had?
To be honest, it's a couple of months ago since I last touched FM24. So I really enjoy getting your guys' save updates because I really miss have a freaking save going on. But when I start my work on a new database, I work like full time every day. So I leave FM24 completely alone and focus entirely on editing. So I'll get back to it because now we know FM25 has been delayed, so there's still time.
So I mean, you've released loads of databases, which we'll talk about, but the latest one, which is actually due to release this week when the podcast is out, is based on the 1994 and 1995 season, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners are probably from, that sort of era. It's a little bit before my time, but I'm sure, I'm going to enjoy some of the players.
Were you born? Were you born?
I wasn't even born. sorry, DeLucas, to make you guys sound old. I wasn't even born. But how excited are you to finally officially release this one? I'm sure you've spent so much time on it.
Absolutely. That's always the payoff, because usually it takes me like from 4 to 6 months of working 10 hours a day on these databases to get them up to a level where I feel like they're playable. There's enough playable leagues in different countries. So it's an expanded universe, so to speak. So while grinding away all the hours in the editor, working on through all the teams and stumble upon all the wonder kits, and I get all the save ideas while I work on the editor. So when I get to the time of the year when I can release a database and share all the nostalgia. We all have our golden eras, right? The 90s is my golden era. Dave, your golden era is another era, right? So we all have that. So the main thing for me is that we can share that nostalgic stuff about those seasons and stuff. We can talk about the players from specific seasons in the past for hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And so obviously with the time delay, like I mentioned earlier, FM25 was meant to be out this week. When was this a plan for FM25, or were you always looking to release this for FM24?
No, earlier this year I released the 07-08 database for FM24, and usually I release one retro database per FM. So this 94-95 database was initially set for release in March for FM25, if FM25 was released in November as it used to. So no, I made the decision to try to push it a little bit. I know a lot of people are like desperate for save ideas or alternative databases and stuff like that to get to March, right? So I felt like if I could make a database another database ready for FM24, why not?
And in terms of when you get an idea, sorry, Matt, in terms of when you get an idea, say, yes, I want to start this database, roughly, I won't hold you to it, obviously, from when you first click open editor to when the database is done, roughly how much time and how many hours do you think you put into it roughly?
Yeah, sometimes I shouldn't do this, but sometimes I look in the Steam workshop, in the Steam app to see how many hours I've spent in FM24.
Yeah,
and sometime I look how many hours I spend in the editor, and it's just stupid. It's absolutely ridiculous. But it is my full-time job, so I'm not complaining. I love it. I love the grind. I love to edit. So 4,000 hours a year in the editor alone.
That's also older than Dave, 4,000 hours.
Probably.
That is insane. Because I know that when you're in the editor and you're making changes, let's say, it clocks how many changes you've made in a database. I mean, we're talking like hundreds and thousands, right? Of all the, are we even higher? Are we 7 figures? Are we 8 figures? I don't know. Do you look at that? Because I mean, obviously everything you do is making changes to the databases out of there.
Yeah, usually a database, I would say, is ready for release around 1.5 million database changes. Wow, and what happens every year is when I cross the 1 million mark database changes, the editor slows down significantly. Okay. It just can't handle any more edits. So I need to merge files and stuff like that to work around it, because it drops its performance level significantly.
It's insane. Like I'm very familiar with your work, and I've been on your streams, and I've seen you launch different databases, and I've trialed a few of them, believe me, and I'll definitely be having a look at the 94, 95. Just for the listeners, Mad Scientist has his own website. You'll find it on his Twitter or Blue Sky or Bebo or wherever you're doing your social media these days. But he's got a thumbnail for the 94, 95 database, and this has instantly got me looking at this. It's got Ronaldo at PSV, Romario Barcelona, Bergkamp Inter Milan, Shearer at Blackburn. I mean, I'm a Newcastle fan. We just don't even. That never happened. I can see George Weah at PSG, Batistuta, Fiorentina, Gaza at Lazio. I mean, I know that when you do your launch streams, like, you know, as much as you're promoting and everything, it becomes a show me this player and show me this player. But like, that's why people should download it, because before you even start playing the game with that database and start managing a team, I know that I'll download that and sit there for 3 hours and just start looking at all the players that I remember playing with in whether it was CM2 or Sensible Soccer, all those games back before Dave was invented.
Yeah. I was gonna say, Lucas, I bet even when you're editing, half of that time is you looking at your monitor going, wow, like, you know, that player's a different level. What in your mind, if you, again, I'm sure there's going to be tens, if not hundreds of players that you would spring to mind. If you could try and pick out 5 players which you think look unbelievable on this database that people have got to download it to check it out, throw some names out. Who are the top players that you think look fantastic on this database?
I mean, Matt already mentioned Ronaldo, R9, who's 17 years old at this point of time, before his injuries and all that stuff, playing in PSV. So I actually tried to compare his profile on this database to Lamine Yamal on FM24, because current ability-wise, they should be around the same place. But the thing is, I get the attributes from older versions of Championship Manager, which is very different. But back then, the current abilities and potential abilities were usually in general a little bit lower, and then the attributes were much higher. Hence why you see more players have 20 in dribbling, 20 in technique and stuff like that. But Ronaldo, I mean, at the start of his career, that's just I have to mention him. And Alan Shearer is definitely also mentionable, because the 94-95 season is where Blackburn won the Premier League, and Shearer and Sutton and Colin Hendry and all those legends over at Blackburn, they did very well. And Shearer is 23 years old, prime. Wow. I never seen a better English striker on any version of Football Manager than Alan Shearer.
Yeah, with R9, and another question which I'll come on to in a second as well, but with R9, in terms of if you're copying the attributes off an older version of the game, things such as injury proneness, do they come into play there? Because I suppose at 17, people weren't to know that he was going to unfortunately have the injuries that he had.
Exactly. And the thing to mention about this database, compared to, for an example, the 0708 database that I released earlier, on the 0708, I copy everything straight over from Football Manager 08. It's a matter of manually copying over everything. I don't have to make any decisions. Sports Interactive has done all the research that I need to copy, right? But on this Championship Manager back in 1994 had 8 player attributes. There were 8 player attributes and current ability and potential ability. So what I've done, and I do on those older databases, is that I try to gather more attributes from more different versions of Championship Manager to piece it together, if you know what I mean. So that way I can see in real life, as you mentioned, no one knew that Ronaldo would be injury prone back then. So I definitely leave it out because he hasn't encountered any major injuries yet.
Have you? So I definitely know what you're talking about with the pain of the manual entry, and there's no import export here. This is for anyone that doesn't know, and even if you've never seen the editor, what we're talking about is you're looking at a player profile screen, mental attributes, technical attributes, physical attributes, goalkeeper attributes, and one by one having to fill them in. I'm secretly hoping that, you've been working on a database and where you've gone to put in, like, I don't know, to give somebody a 2 for a particular attribute, you've given them 20 and not noticed, and maybe they're in a lower league, and then you run a season or you sim a few seasons and you've got this Ballon d'Or winner who's like playing for Mansfield or something. Has that ever happened?
Actually, in one of my older databases I released like 7 years ago or something, I did one mistake in a random player's current ability. No, potential ability. I added an extra value, so it ended up giving it the max 200. So just a random player who had the highest potential in the world. But nowadays, I have a lot of people helping me out. While I do the editing, they test the database and double check my work. So usually we avoid all that stuff, but it is a manual job, so it can occur, definitely.
Yeah.
I suppose it did happen in, like Dave, you just mentioned Tom Madeira. Like that was a researcher taking the piss, really, in terms of the name and the attributes, but it did slip through. And to be honest, DeLucas, Dave has been doing this for years with Adama Traore. He just keeps giving him 20 for pace and acceleration.
I did it genuinely. I did because I would assume the way that I have to do Wolves attributes without going into too much detail, it's very similar to the editor as such. And I have done it recently where I put it was meant to be 11 for an attribute, and I put the players passing as 1. And to be fair, the head researcher said, did you mean to put his passing as 1? I was like, no, definitely not. So, but luckily, because I've got people above me that can say, Dave, do this. But I remember that database, I'm sure it was a new gen, a youth player called DeLucas that played for Parma that had the 200 PA, I reckon, on that database.
I'll make sure it is next time, yeah.
I wouldn't want a couple of little Easter eggs on the next database, maybe. I don't think it would be interesting to see what people say.
Absolutely.
What's interesting about this database then, DeLucas, because obviously over time there have been rule changes, there have been different competitions, different cup tournaments. Is that all in this game? Have you been able to implement all these rule changes and different league styles into this database?
Usually I actually ignore it because it would be a huge task to revert the world back to as it was in 94, even just the player values and wages. But this year I've teamed up with my good friend of mine who's called Mr. Tinney. He's made a regen mod for my previous retro database which implements real-life regions over the coming years up to modern day. And he's been cracking on with the advanced rules in the pregame editor. That's just a whole other board game, the advanced rules. Nothing makes sense. But he has managed to bring back the original Champions League format from 1994 with the group stages, also the UEFA Cup and the Cup Winners' Cup, also the international competitions, and details like the Premier League in 94-95 had 22 teams in it. He's managed to make a change from the second season to 20 teams. The Scottish Prem had only 10 teams back then. They will switch to 12 teams over time. So details like that will make this database, I reckon, the most realistic I've ever been involved in. Absolutely.
Sounds amazing.
Football, you never really think about it, but obviously what are we talking about? 30 odd years ago? Is it 30? No, it's more 30, than that, right? It's more than 30 years ago. It's crazy. How much football has changed, teams, competitions, the whole lot. Is there anything in particular Like anything particularly wild that you found, while you were putting together teams and leagues? I'm trying to think like the most drastic changes or, changes to particular football teams, whether it's to do with, I don't know, the actual name of the club, or I don't know, there has to be something kind of that stands out where it doesn't exist anymore.
There's always the aspect of bringing back clubs who's extinct nowadays, but were not extinct back then. And also, I do encounter, as we are 30 years back in time, I think that I do encounter a lot of players who's passed away since then.
Oh yeah, wow,
and some of them passed away in a really young age. So I always stop up for a minute when I add those and just try to do it with the utmost respect to add those kind of guys to the database. But rule changes, I think it's kind of interesting. There's 22 teams in the Premier League back then. That's a significant difference from nowadays, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's talked about a lot when you're trying to, because people always try to compare, and they look at, I think Andy Cole is a really common one, and you know how many goals Andy Cole would have scored in a season, or even Shearer to an extent. But there's always the asterisks of, played an extra few games than the likes of Haaland or Henry or whoever. I'm trying to think of the teams that were in the Premier League, and like, was this a Swindon Town or an Oldham Athletic kind of a time back in the Premier League?
No, both Oldham and Swindon had been relegated.
They had been relegated. Okay,
yeah.
So we're looking at Sheffield Wednesday probably, and
yes, sir.
These were golden days.
You had Wimbledon.
Wow,
the crazy guy.
That's a good example. Yeah. And you had Steve Bull's Wolves, Dave, I'm sure.
I know, I was going to say, I'm sure Steve Bull would look. I'll have to have a look. I need to have a look at Wolves, because we would have been, we may have been in the second division then, I'm not sure, but sorry, can you Dupe in the background for
There's
me?
There's Dupe again, yeah.
I was going to say, Deluxe as well, in terms of, you mentioned about the new gens, how does that work?
Yeah, that's, as I mentioned as well, that's the Mr. Tinney, who's the creator of that brilliant regen mod. Actually, it's outside of my expert knowledge, because it's not made with the pregame editor. It's made like HTML coding or something like that. So I can't even explain how he makes it. It blows my mind that he can get it to work. I've seen others add like themselves as a regen in the future or something like that. But this is just incredible. I have no idea how he does it, to be honest.
So does he have players from, say, for argument's sake, I don't know, maybe it's a bit too early for the likes of Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo to come through in a number of years, or?
Definitely. They'll spawn in via youth intakes in the club they began at in real life in that exact season.
That is wild, yeah.
That is mad. And in terms of the, what was I going to say now? I can't remember what I was going to say.
Dave is trying to think, how can he get a Dave as a party new gen into this database?
That's all he's wondering. What I was going to say was, in terms, you mentioned earlier about the values as well. So are the values of players up to date with like 2024, or will you go in and Ronaldo's going to be worth like 2 or 3 million rather than sort of 70, 80 million as he would be now?
I always try to revert the values and wages to as they were in the 90s, or close to as they were. But it's really difficult to manipulate FM24 to believe it's in the past, because there's so much going on in the background of the game, sponsorship money, prize money that will up the stuff. So usually, even though if I give like Eric Cantona a weekly wage of 5K, Man United will offer contract extension on day one. Here is 50K or 80K, right? And then it's broken from the get-go. Yeah. But again, this year, with the help from Mr. Tinney, he's experimented on this and kept on experimenting on it. I think we have hit a quite good balance. So the both the values and the wages will stay as realistic as possible for many seasons ahead in the database.
Do politics come into this to an extent, right? I mean, I'm going to make a joke about Brexit now. There can't be any Brexit in 1994 for sure. But things like, I don't know, I'm thinking about the Yugoslavia and Croatia and all of this. I'm trying to get my timings right now, but I'm showing my age here, so I'm trying to remember. And I mean, even like there was no euro currency back then. Do you decide can you even take that out? I'm trying to get my head around how far are you pushing this reality check?
Yeah, I have to have some kind of limit, right? I can't go into everything, but as you mentioned, just bringing back a country who's not around any longer, like Yugoslavia, is a really, really difficult task in the editor to revive a country, a nation entirely. So I do leave it out. I don't touch it, and I don't have enough knowledge of political issues like that. So I really don't want to get biased or take any decisions that I don't know what I'm doing.
As well. You don't want to break it either. Do you know what I mean? For the sake of, there'll be no international management anymore anyway, so nobody's going to want to do it.
Yeah, and I was
it's interesting though.
And is there's a logo pack, right? Is there a competition and logo pack for this as well?
Yeah, original logo pack, kit pack. The kit pack is fucking awesome. The kids from back then really ups the immersion, and a face pack with all the legends and stuff like that.
No, I'll have to have a look at that. Like, I think I downloaded, and this sort of leads on to the next question. I think it was during COVID, DeLucas, you did one. I think it was the 06, 07 one, I think. Yeah, because I was managing Wolves in the Championship, and I'd signed Gareth Bale because he was still at Southampton then. So I'd signed him, and that was really fun. I got a couple of good seasons out of that as well. But I mean, just looking on your website, you've done a number of databases over the years. Any of those stand out for you? I'm sure, like this one, like you said, in terms of the quality and quantity and what you've been able to do to this database is probably by far the best. And I'm sure next year you'll be able to step it up as well. But for you, is there any that stand out as one of your favorites, favorite databases over the years?
It's like picking your favorite
as I said
child,
earlier,
Dave,
we all have our golden eras, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about this as well, every year I release a new season. Some people get back to me, this was the specific season I got into football. I remember this season so clearly. We all got those, and I love to hear stories about it. And as I am an old geezer about now, I released the 92-93 database a couple of years ago. That's an epic season for me because I do remember that season. My nation, Denmark, won the freaking Euros.
Yes.
And it was the first season of the Premier League in England as well. So there was some trademarks about that season. But I actually think this 94 season I'm working on right now is even more up my ballpark because I was a little bit older and very much into football.
I think it's going to be, I reckon we won't go into our actual ages and date of births here now because we'll only embarrass ourselves in front of the young man here. But I reckon we're probably a similar generation, and I think a lot of the long-term FM players out there would be a similar generation. This is just going to be an absolute nostalgia fest. And for a lot of people, that's when football was good, when football was great, or it was just getting brilliant. It was at that time where, particularly we think about the Premier League, Sky hadn't completely taken over and the money wasn't what it was. This was just proper, football, like an international transfer, like an overseas transfer into the Premier League was a huge deal. It was, it's just, it was a wonderful time. And again, like I said, I can see myself spending hours once this database drops. You mentioned quickly there, Mr. Tinney, you said you've got a good gang of people to help you test it. Like, I know for a fact that you started doing this by yourself in some bunker or lab or basement somewhere locked away for hours and hours. It's obviously grown in terms of popularity. I've seen the expansion. I've seen how many people love it and use all the databases you do. I see what the streams are like when you do a launch. Like, it's buzzing. People are absolutely living for it. But how many people actually help you now? What's the team kind of look like?
Oh, sorry. Can you say that again, Paul?
Yeah, I was just saying, how many people are kind of involved now? Let's say when you're building the new database, how many you've got people helping you build, maybe doing attributes and obviously testing. What's the Mad Scientist team look like?
So because the name Mad Scientist fits the mold is because I love the grind of working on the player attributes and stuff like that. So I prefer to do that myself. But as I said, this year I've teamed up with Mr. Tinney, who's then concentrated on the advanced rules, all the league setups and stuff like that. So he's done a huge job helping me with that. And usually there's like a core group of 10 people who constantly do simulations, test stuff out while we work on the database. So that is very, very helpful to us as well. Around 10 people, I would think, is the core group.
Nice.
And as you mentioned, the launch streams as well. It's just like 1.5 hour, 2 hours of people throwing player names into the chat, and I just show player profiles. That's all it's about.
That's mad, really. But you need like 1.5 million changes. You need to test it, right? You want it to be as perfect as it can be when it drops. But as we all know, and whether you're doing online competitions or creating databases for your own save or network saves, they can break so easily, and we've seen saves get ruined by something unexpected. So testing is important, and I think people probably don't appreciate not only the hours and hours of doing all the attributes, but then the quality checks and actually going back and revising the changes and all that. So very impressive, I have to say.
And going into FM25, DeLucas, have you heard any news on the FM editor? Are you worried that one day Sports Interactive might get rid of it completely, or do you just hoping it's gonna stay the same as normal?
I would say I'm an optimist by heart, so I just hope and cross my fingers there'll be a pre-game editor, obviously. But FM25 by now, right? We don't know much. We really don't know much. So obviously I'm worried because the pre-game editor is my thing. So I have no idea. I'm just worried, but I hope for a really good game. I'm still quite optimistic. I hope they'll get that match engine to be freaking great, and so I just hope they'll make the game happen.
And I'm sure you've already got a notepad of different ideas. Have you got the next season ready in mind for what you're going to aim to do in FM25?
Actually, usually I post polls on all my socials and ask people, tell me which seasons you want, and I'll let people decide like that via voting. But as I've by now done like a handful of seasons from the 90s, a handful of seasons from the early 2000s, we're going to narrow it down a little bit. So I'll probably choose a couple of seasons and leave them into a poll so people can vote and decide. But again, we don't know what is possible with FM25. I hope we can still carry over a save from 24 to 25, just like we could from 23 to 24. That will be a backup plan to carry over one of my databases to 25. Hope that'll work.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And you've mentioned it a couple of times in regards to now this being a job for you, which is, fantastic. And it's amazing. And I've mentioned it a couple of times on this podcast, how the community has changed so much, where maybe this time 5 or 6 years ago, there were maybe one or two people that were able to do content creation as a full-time job. And now there's more people. If I'm honest, I didn't realize you did this full-time, which it's great to hear. But how does it work for you? Because I think we exchanged messages a short while ago in regards to this. And Sports Interactive used to be very grey in regards to people being, let's say, being able to make direct money off of Football Manager databases and add-ons. In terms of donations, I think you're able to accept that. So is this through your Patreon, through donations, that you're able to make this your full-time job?
Exactly, absolutely. I rely on donations, and I've done for years, obviously, and it's still absolutely mind blowing to me because what I do is a niche thing for a football management game, which is not for everyone, right? FIFA is a way bigger audience, and so it's still kind of mind blowing. So the donations just started to rise steadily over the years. Every time I release a new database, it rised in stature like that, and I took the leap. It's almost 2 years ago already. I took the leap, and it's still kind of mind blowing because I can do what is my passion. I know it's crazy for some people to hear when I tell them, well, I edit 8 to 10 hours a day on a football management game, retro databases. But I really love what I do, so I see it as a huge privilege. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think the passion always comes out when you present it. I remember going onto your streams, and I've often thought, this guy has been looking at this database for like literally months, looking at the players, looking at the attributes, and to have the same enthusiasm to show it to people. I think you can see it. It's the fruits of your labor, and I know it's obviously you take pride in the work you do. But it's like everyone else. It's because you love that time. You love that period of football. You love the nostalgia as well. And to be able to look back. And I think, I think it's a testament to the work you do that you see how many people enjoy it. And I think that's also a huge reward in it, right? And I also think that people, again, not people like Dave, not the kids, not the TikTok generation.
I think I'll still
right?
enjoy this though, because it'll be players that I've heard of but not really got much experience of. And I think it'll be cool.
I just think a lot of people of a certain age get disillusioned with football, like let's say real life football, but they still love Football Manager. And to be able to go back, like a lot of people still go and they play CM3 or CM4 or CM 97, 98 or 01, 02. They were the big ones. So I think there's even though it is, like you said, it's niche, I do think that there is a substantial, number of people. When you think about how many people play FM24 in the millions, as we said, there is quite a lot that want to play that generation of it and just bring themselves back because they're sick of the real life stuff. They're sick of PSR and VAR and all the bullshit. So, no, man, fair play. I really enjoyed it as well. And you know that because I tend to land into your streams every now and again. So, can only say props for all the work you've done. And I know a lot of listeners will feel the same.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone's not aware of DeLucas's work, we'll make sure we leave a link for it in the top of the description as well, where you could check out his website. You could check out the 94-95 retro database as well. And DeLucas, before we let you go, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we finish?
Just thanks for having me, guys. I've been listening to 5-Star Podcast since, how old were you, Dave, in the beginning? Like 16 or something?
How long were we going?
Back when was Teach were around.
He was like Lamine Yamal. He had to use a different dressing room.
380 weeks. So what's this? 380 in years.
381 this
7
week.
years. 20 years old I was. 7 years this podcast has been going.
Jeez.
Wow.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Soon there'll be a retro database of the 5-Star pod. Teach will be on it then.
Yeah. Well, no, it's been an absolute
and also,
pleasure.
I was going to tell him as well, just shout out where people can find you, obviously on the internet and not in real life maybe, but where can people find you online?
Yeah, the Mad Scientist FM in most places. I mean, I'm even on TikTok these days, goddammit.
You're as bad as Dave.
Yeah. I love the TikTok. I'll have to look out for you anyway. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. And Mad as well, thanks for, both Mads, thanks for joining us. And thank you for listening once again to the 5-Star Potential. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. You can find the links for each of us in the podcast description or by visiting 5starpotential.com, where you can find all of our latest Football Manager content and, of course, the Mad Scientist database as well. 5-Star Potential is available on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and most other popular podcast apps and platforms with a new podcast released every week. Thank you all for listening, and there will be more from us next week. Say goodbye, folks.
Goodbye, folks. Dave, will you let Dupe out there? I think he really needs to get out.
Yeah.